All right, perfect. I think we're going good, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. My name is Russell Graves, coming to you live from Dodge City, Texas. And if you're just now joining in, we had a little issue with my camera, so I'm going to leave my camera turned off today. You won't be able to see me, but you should be able to hear me. Uh, and I think everyone can see everything okay. It seems to be a little bit of a lag. I don't know. I don't know if the rain's affecting anything, but sometimes when you broadcast from out in the country, you never know how things are going to turn out. So we're going to do the best we can today. Hopefully, you'll be able to keep see my screen and everything else. But this is being recorded. If there's a technological glitch along the way, you'll get a recording of the program. We can always re-air it from there. So without further ado, I'll go get started. A lot of times these just simple slideshows arise from just the trips we do. I've been fortunate enough to be able to travel uh, over a lot of North America this past year, leading photo tours with backcountry journeys and getting to know the best parts, getting to know a lot of you guys. And one of the cool things about it when we're on these trips is not only the chance for the guests, to take great pictures, but also I squeeze in a few pictures myself along the way. So the good folks over at Backcountry Journeys just asked me to kind of do nothing really, not focused on just education, but wanted me to give a bear slideshow of some of my favorite bear pictures I've taken over the past year. So this is in a little bit of chronological order. I'm going to kind of show you from when I first started seeing bears last year until now. Some of my favorite pictures I've taken and kind of give you the stories behind some of them. And so, as always, uh, if you remember how I like to do things, I want to make this a dialogue and not a monologue. So, even though I can't hear you, you can still type questions on the screen as I go along. Questions are really, I love answering questions. So, if you want to ask a question about settings or ask a question about where I was, if you didn't catch where I was on a particular shot, or just kind of what my thoughts were behind the shoot, I'd be glad to answer any of those questions as well. So again, format's going to be pretty simple. There's I think about 40 bear pictures in this presentation today. Nothing fancy on the transitions, nothing fancy in the layout, just straight up bear photography and the stories behind some of the pictures. So without further ado, let me make one more check, make sure everything's working, see a few more names I recognize. Al's in the house as well as Stan. Hope you guys are doing okay. So we'll I'll go ahead and get started. So, I've told this story before and I'll tell it again. Most of my life, well, up until probably about 3 or 4 years ago, I'd seen two bears in the wild in my entire life. And both of them were on the same trip in northern New Mexico. I was driving around and they just happened to cross the road in front of me. I didn't get any spectacular pictures, but they were bear pictures nonetheless, and I was excited to see them. And that all changed in September of, I think, 2017, when I was a guest on a backcountry journeys trip and went to Katmai to see the brown bears. And was really wondering, because bears were so rare to me in my life, I was really wondering if we'd see any. And if you've ever been on that Katmai trip, you know that bears are everywhere. So from the minute we landed in Katmai on that backcountry journey trip, and again, remember, I'm a guest. I'm not a guide. So I'm going along like you guys go along. And so from the minute we landed, I took my first bear pictures within a couple of minutes of us arriving there. And since that day, I've literally seen thousands of bears in the wild, and it's still a treat every time you get to see one. Last fall, I'm sorry, last spring, I was in the Smoky Mountains on a tour, and this is one of the first bears we saw. It's a big male. You can see how good a shape he's in. He got a beautiful, beautiful coat, and he came walking out, and the first thing he started doing was wrestling with a cedar tree. And that's what he's doing there. And sometimes on these things you get lucky. And a lot of times people ask, well, how do you know how to find wildlife so good? Well, it's really as simple as this. And this is a good tip for you too, for finding wildlife. if I want to go look for, I'm just going to pick out the name I know off the list. If I want to go look for Allen, the thing I do is I go to Allen's neighborhood, and I know if I go to Allen's neighborhood enough, chances are I'm going to see Allen in his neighborhood, and that's kind of how finding wildlife is. And so sometimes you get lucky though. A lot of times, other people find the bears before we find them. But on this one particular instance in the Smokies last year, we actually saw him first. We had pulled off on the side of the road for just a second to look at some deer, and I looked off into the woods and I saw a black blob coming through the woods, and we got lucky and he walked out right in front of us, and we were the only group there for the first probably 5 minutes of photographing it. And so he got out in front of us, acted real natural, and we were able to get some really nice shots of these bears. And one of the things that I struggled with on this shot here is whether or not to Photoshop out the ear tag that this female bear has, but I thought I'd leave it because it's a good biological lesson. A lot of times when you're in these national parks where we travel to, you'll see bears that are tagged, and the biologists there tag them for a couple reasons. One is just strictly biological survey. You can name bears all you want, but unless you have a distinct identifying marker on it, it's hard to. Bears change, like people change, and you may think one bear is named one thing, but it's really another bear you're looking at, especially in Katmai when they name those. But a lot of times scientists will put these ear tags in the ears so that way they can positively identify that bear from a distance, and they're able to do anecdotal observations on where the animals are moving to, what area they're in. And typically in places like the Smoky Mountains, they'll tag the female bears so that way they're able to identify which bear, they're able to identify which bears are having cubs and how many cubs they're having, and kind of get an overall idea of the health of the bears in that area and where they're moving to too. So if you notice on this bear here, she's actually got two tags. She's got a tag in her left ear and a tag in her right ear and a tag in her left ear. This was actually one of that bear's cubs. She's eating that. If you wonder what's in that cub's mouth, it's a plant that grows in the spring called American cancer root. And apparently it's a bear delicacy because every time we saw bears last spring, they were foraging around for that. And I always thought this picture was kind of cool, how that cancer root's just sticking out of the end of that bear cub's mouth. And then that's another one of her cubs hiding out, checking us out. And, this was another instance where we were the first ones to see these bears and got to hang with them for just a little bit before the crowd started showing up. But that's always a treat when you get to see bears like that in the wild. And so that was back in April. So after April was over, we changed scenery and ended up going to Tuxedni Bay, Alaska. That was for the Alaska Uncharted Bears trip, and really a special trip that was. Not only was it a complete wilderness adventure. I'm not going to say picture taking was impossible because we got a lot of great shots there, but the photography opportunities there, you had to earn them, and I think that's not a bad thing, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. We had to put the work in to get the shots we took, but we were rewarded with some great scenes. Now, I'd be telling you a little bit of a fib if I say we had to put the work in on this shot, because actually, right after we got, right after we pulled in, or right after we got to camp, or right after I got to camp, we kind of came out and on multiple planes, but I was the last group in. And once I came in, we were setting up camp, getting everyone ready to go out for the day, and this brown bear came walking down the beach just right in front of us. And so not only did I get this shot, but every guest on the trip got that shot as well, as that bear went sidling right past us. And one of the things I like to do, and you can really see it in this picture, is I like to try to get as low as I can. If I could have got on my belly, I would have shot there, but there was kind of crowded where we were standing. So all I did was sit down. And that's a good lesson when you're photographing any kind of wildlife, really. You go to national parks a lot, and you'll see people, whether you're talking Yellowstone or whether you're talking Smoky Mountains or Bosque del Apache coming up this December when we photograph wildlife there, you'll see a lot of people kind of standing shoulder to shoulder taking the same picture over and over again. And what I encourage people to do always when you can is try to get it eye level with the animal or lower. and you can see that I was pretty low with this animal, maybe a little bit above eye level because it was downhill from me on the beach. But I try to get as low as I can because you can see this little sliver right underneath the bear that's out of focus, and that's to me the way I like to compose wildlife pictures. If I can have something out of focus in the foreground and then a really nice out of focus background, it just really kind of subtly and a little bit subconsciously sort of frames that animal and really makes the picture stand out a little more. So that's actually her walking not towards us. She's walking in our direction, but she didn't walk at us. She's walking in our general direction. But she had spotted some people that was in our group, and that's where it was her looking at it there. And then that's kind of coming. As she's walking down the beach, she's sort of zigzagging, and so this is one of the shots where she came more directly at us. But and that's another thing I encourage people to do when we're shooting pictures of bears or any other kind of wildlife is, it's easy to shoot horizontal pictures, but sometimes you got to think of vertical. And, you may say, well, I can crop later, and technically you can, but I just think it's a nice mix when you can shoot these pictures natively in vertical, because sometimes if like on the case of these bears, sometimes if they're too close, you can't crop very good vertically. So I always encourage people to mix it up, shoot some horizontals, shoot some verticals, and you'll be glad in the end you did. Got a question came in right quick. What lens were you using and how far away were you? So on all these pictures we've seen so far, these are all shot with I shoot Canon gear for now. I'm thinking about switching. I'd love to hear people's input later on about Sony, or I probably won't switch to Nikon. Nothing against Nikon, but everything's backwards from Nikon to Canon in terms of how the lens go on and all that. And I'm kind of an old guy, so I don't want to change the way I'm doing things there. So one of the things that I always, or one of the things I'm thinking about doing is switching from Canon. But all these pictures we're looking at today, I'm still using Canon. I haven't switched yet, and I may not switch. But all these pictures I've shot today so far have been shot with a 500 millimeter lens. It's an f4 lens, Canon. And then Linda asked, were you using a tripod or were you handheld? So I can tell you, I'm going to back up to the first. When this black bear showed up, this first one, I was not using a tripod, but I was using the next best thing. I'm an advocate. If you've listened to me much, I'm an advocate of using a tripod just about every chance you get. And with that big 500 millimeter lens I've got, it's a version 1 of that particular lens, so it's a little heavier. And so I've got the strength to be able to handhold it, but I try not to, because when you handhold it, I still don't believe that the technology helps, but I still don't believe it helps as much as just having your camera locked down on a good tripod. Even though I didn't use a tripod on this one, the second best thing I did on these black bear pictures was I used I just wadded up my jacket and put the camera on top of the hood of the vehicle. And that works as good because it's just a good steady prop. There's some pictures later on I'll show you that where I used a fence post. So I'm always, if the action happens quick and I don't have time to, well, let me back up. If I have time to put on my tripod, Linda, I'll always use my tripod. If I don't have time, the first thing I'm doing is looking for some kind of support. And then, like in this picture here of these bears, these were all shot on a tripod. And again, I'll double down on this. I think using a tripod is the one thing that you can do that will exponentially increase the quality of your photos. Even though you may not know more about your camera, you're a lot of people are in this kind of learning mode, and even me, I'm still learning things about these cameras. And particularly if I end up switching to a different camera system, then my learning curve starts all over again. But even though I may be in this learning phase where I'm still learning how my camera works and learning what all the buttons and the dials do and learning how everything operates, the one simple piece of equipment that will really foolproof a lot of my efforts is going to be a tripod. So I'm always an advocate of using a tripod. Jeff, I'll get to your question in just a little bit because that's a great question. I wanted to add one more point about support to this one. Now, I'd mentioned when I was talking about this picture is get at a lower angle. if the action's happening so quick where I can't get my tripod set up and I have to, well, getting it at a lower angle, if you're laying prone on the ground, you can always use the ground or use a rock or a stump or something else as a support. Or if you're sitting on your rear end, like I think I was on this one, but I had my camera on a tripod on this particular picture. But if I don't, I can still use my elbows to prop it and sit on my rear end. I can put my knees up and use my elbows to prop on the knees and hold the camera against my body. That's an improvised way of doing it. It's not quite as steady as a tripod, but it's still a lot steadier than standing on 2 feet and trying to hold your camera like that. So because you've dropped your center of gravity, your body mass is spread out over a wider area because most people's butts are bigger than their 2 feet combined. And so you're spreading your body weight over a large area and you're just making yourself a lot more steady. But again, tripod whenever you get a chance. Jeff asked the question, do you need to do exposure compensation for black bears or brown bears? It all depends on the amount on the light, Jeff, not the amount of light, but the ambient light when you're taking the pictures. These particular pictures here, I don't believe I used exposure compensation. Really, I did a webinar a few weeks ago that was about using metadata to kind of discover trends in how you shoot and help teach you about how you shoot and really uncover other pieces of data. And one of the things I revealed to everybody, I've got 620,000 images in my library. And one of the things that I revealed on that is about 80% of the pictures I take are shot on aperture priority mode. And so, I explain this all the time. Aperture priority, shutter priority, or manual, if you're correctly exposed, no matter what you set it on, will all have the same settings. All those three things are different routes to get to the same location. It's like this. If you use your phone to try to figure out how to get from, say, your house to, let's say, Albuquerque, New Mexico, when Apple Maps or Google Maps show you the choices to get from your house to Albuquerque, New Mexico, it'll likely show you multiple routes. But the one thing you got to remember, you can take route 1, route 2, or route 3, but they'll always get you back to the same point. And that's how aperture, shutter, and manual is. So I've always felt like aperture priority helps me get to that destination quicker because that's one less decision I have to make and one less dial I have to turn to dial everything in correctly. Essentially, I'm setting the aperture. I like a wide open aperture and then let the camera decide what the shutter speed is. Now, to answer your question directly, Jeff, when I shoot aperture priority, one of the first things I do in a scene is I'll look at the back of the camera. If the scene looks fine, I keep shooting. If it looks too dark, and a lot of times you'll get that, especially if a black bear is in bright sunlight, if it looks too, I'll take it back. If the scene looks too dark, no matter the scene, I know I've got to add light. And then I've got to, if the scene looks too dark, I know I've got to add light. So I dial in plus exposure compensation. And if the scene's too bright, I know I got to take light away. So I'm minus exposure compensation. And so brown bears are kind of, even though they're called brown bears, they're usually not really super, super, super brown. And so typically they're middle tone and you don't have to dial in any exposure compensation. But black bears, depending on the background they're on or depending on the kind of sunlight, ambient light they're in, sometimes you do have to dial it in because if you've got a black bear that's dominating the frame of a picture, the camera is going to look at that like it's a shadow and it's going to try to fill in the shadows. So it's going to tend to overexpose something that black. So you might have to underexpose that image just a little bit based on what the camera says. But like I said, the first thing I do is take a picture, look at the image, and do I decide, do I take light away or do I add light based on if it's too dark, I got to add light. So I'm plus exposure compensation. If it's too light, I got to take light away. So I'm minus exposure compensation. And back to that webinar I did, I looked at my metadata over all those pictures, and it's not all 620,000, but 85,000 or so pictures I used to dial in exposure compensation. I think about 85 to 90% of them were not more than plus one stop or not more than minus one stop. So I learned there's definitely a sweet spot in most wildlife photography I do is that it's either going to be plus one or minus one on exposure compensation. And rarely does it go outside those bounds. So That was kind of a long answer to your question, Jeff, but it's a little bit nuanced. Just it's all situational, is what it comes down to. If we can bring lessons out from this presentation, one of the things too I like to tell people to concentrate on is and I think I did a video about this for bird photography, but really I always try to take a 3-shot approach to every wildlife shot that I do. I'll try to get a picture of the animal, a broader picture of the animal and its habitat. I'll try to get a picture of the animal actually doing something. I'll try to get a picture of what I call the yearbook shot, just a good representative picture of the animal. That would be a yearbook shot. This would be an animal kind of in its habitat, or this one even, and that would be an example of an animal actually doing something other than just standing still. But one of the 4 things I try to do when you can is think about the details. Every story is made up of the same basic elements. You got a beginning where the story starts, and then you've got to end where the story ends, and then you've got this whole big part in the middle. Well, the whole middle is made up of details. And one of the things I try to do whenever I can was I sacrificed a picture of this bear when it's at its closest to me, and I just focused on I want to get a good picture of its feet. And that's what I was thinking about there when I shot this picture, is just get a good picture of its feet. And it's just one of those detail shots that would help tell the story. As I'm lining up these pictures of brown bears, it's not going to be just picture after picture after picture, a yearbook shot. I'm going to have some variance in the way I present the pictures, and the details are one big part of that variance. And as I go through the slideshow, again, in chronological order from the order I saw these bears this past year, I threw in a few pictures to help illustrate that point as well. Well, here's one right here. I didn't know that one was next. Just a simple shot of some bear claws in the mud. And if I don't see any names on here except for maybe Dana that was in the in Tuxedni Bay with us on that trip. But if you were there, you knew that this is pretty indicative of where the bears lived. They would feed in these sedge meadows, and these sedge meadows were essentially kind of a big swamp. And so we'd have to wait around in the meadows looking for bears, but there'd be places where they would leave these kind of unkempt tracks in the mud. And again, it's one of those things that helps tell the story of where the bears live. And every time I get a chance to take pictures like this, I do. Of all the pictures I took in Tuxedni Bay, this may be my favorite one, because look how the nose is crinkled. This bear has some of the sedges in its mouth. This is like a big salad bowl for these guys. They'll go out there and eat on those plants, and just the bear and the wet fur and everything about it. I just love this picture. And this was taken on the bear meadows there at Tuxedni Bay. John asked the question: if your subject is over 50 yards away, can you get fair results with a 60x optical zoom point and shoot? So the one thing I would want to know is that I don't know the camera, so I'd have to research this a little bit more, John. But that 60x, what is the 60 times based off of? If it's 60 times normal view, so if and you guys probably know this, but it bears repeating anyway. If you look at anything that's measured in optical terms, is like 10x, like binoculars oftentimes are in 10x, or like John's mentioning 60x optical zoom on the camera. On binoculars, I know, and again, I'm not sure about this camera, John, so I'd have to have a little more information. On binoculars, I know 10x is like 10 times human vision. Well, to equate that to camera view, we see in 50 millimeters. And if we're talking full frame sensor or film terms, we see in 50 millimeters. So if 50 millimeters is normal view, then a 60x, if that's what that camera is based on, normal view, a 60x zoom would be the equivalent to 3,000 millimeters. So you'd be able to get plenty good pictures 50 yards away with a 3,000 millimeter, because we were probably a little more than 50 yards away with this bear, and I was shooting this on 720 millimeters, 500 or 740 millimeters, 500 millimeter lens with a 1.4. No, it's 720. 500 millimeter lens with a 1.4 converter. And so back to that, we see in 50 millimeters, and so a good equivalent would be like 500 millimeter lens would be equivalent to a 10x. A 600 millimeter lens would be a 12x, and then so on. So that's how that's measured. So John, if you can, I'll share my contact info with me later. If you can kind of share some specs on that camera with me, or give me a link to that camera, I can certainly help you figure that out. This is on Tuxedo Bay. This is where the bears lived, or this is where they would feed. We'd catch them out in these sedge meadows every day, and this is actually a moose antler we found, and the moose antler, it's all tromped down around the moose antler. The grass is, because bears would go in there and feed on it. These moose antlers are made of bone, so they're rich in calcium, and so bears and any other kind of animal that was deficient in calcium would come take their turn gnawing on these things and then move off and do something else. But this is one of those. This is one of those pictures that I thought was a valuable shot. It tells a story of where these bears live and some of the things they encounter in their habitat. So I got a question coming in from Carolyn. She said she's reporting that she can't hear, but if anyone else is having that, if anyone else can hear me, just let me know. I'm going to keep going. This is one of the pictures of some more tracks I found in the mud. And these tracks were better than other tracks we found, but I thought this picture here was a nice scene setter to tell the stories of the bears, just because it led off into the bay. Every day that tide would come in and it would go out, and there's a huge tide, but they would go out and be in the mud flats and feed for clams out in the mud flats when that tide would go out. Okay, so I'm getting a message that everyone can hear me fine. So I don't know if Carolyn, she can't hear me. That may be an issue with hers. I'm gonna answer her directly real fast. Okay, I'm back to it. Oh, thanks, Linda. Yeah, I love this bear track image as well. This was, it's one of those things that it's just, these are pictures you look for. If Linda, I think it was your group I played the game with, but I play a game from time to time with some of these groups on, it's just an illustrative lesson on how to see beyond what's obvious. One of the things I struggled with as a beginning photographer is seeing things like everyone else saw it. There's pictures everywhere. You just got to learn to look for them. And this is an example of that. Even though I was walking around with my 500 millimeter lens, when I saw this scene, I thought all the lines of it from a traditional landscape shot were too powerful not to take this picture, because you got all these kind of leading lines going diagonal out into the bay, and they're all sort of anchored by that mountain range in the background. By the way, I'll show you another shot of that mountain range in a minute. This was our view from where we were at, but you've got the bonus of those bear tracks snaking their way across the mud away from you. And just that picture to me invokes a lot of questions, and it's a satisfying picture. And I love looking for shots like that, because it tells so many stories without really any overt action at all in the picture. Oh, here's a panoramic shot I took. So the mountain range that you can see in the background here is the same mountain range there. And you see all the water, and you see a slight reflecting into the water. But then you see that big, and this picture really doesn't do it justice, but you see that big mammoth peak in the background. That is Mount Iliamna. It's an active volcano, and a couple of days we saw it steaming while we were there, and that was just pretty cool to wake up every morning and when we could see, because we had some bad weather, we couldn't see across there. But it's pretty neat to wake up every morning and see that big volcano right there across the bay from you. It's just a beautiful, beautiful scene. But again, I felt compelled to take a picture like this, even though it was primarily a wildlife trip. I always try to take scenes of pictures where the animals live, so that way I can record for posterity and help tell their stories. I know a lot of people get home from these trips and they use these images and put them together to put together some kind of book just to remember their journeys from, or their journey as a field. And it's, to me, it's important because I do the same thing. I don't put books together, but when I shoot professionally, I shoot for a lot of magazines and go on assignment for a lot of magazines. And the same approach I try to teach people on backcountry journeys tours is the same thing I use professionally, is that you try to tell a story. You try to fill in those details. Like I said earlier, stories have a beginning and the end, but they're full of details right in the middle. And you just try to tell the details of the story. Where do the bears live? What are the animals that live around them? What does that area look like? What does it look like from the three basic shots you see every movie made from? You see movies, if you watch any TV show, they're made of the same three basic shots. They're made of a wide angle shot, a mid-range shot, and then a close-up shot. And then it's those three elements in varying orders that get played over and over and over again in a movie. Well, you can accomplish the same thing with still photography. You just got to think about it and be conscious of it. And a lot of times what I'll do, especially if it's a new place I go, on my phone, I was sharing this with someone the other day. On my phone, I'll build a lookbook. I'll kind of find pictures that inspire me or a style that inspires me. And I'll build some albums on my iPhone just as reference for me to look at, to think, okay, I want to get these shots while I'm here, and I want to try to shoot them to look like this, maybe a landscape shot, or maybe whatever else. And then I build myself checklist on my phone to make sure I get that shot, and I'm done. And that way it saves me a little bit of thinking, and I know I've got my base covered. It's just pre-planning before a shoot, and that's I hear people say all the time, well, I know how to do panoramics, I just never think about them. Well, I think about them because I make sure I put them on my list. And Bruce asked, is that a pano knit together? Yeah, it is, Bruce. That's really, so one of the things that, this isn't a great pano because I didn't take any time to work on it. As I look at the picture, I can see a little banding in there. And I wasn't worried about that too much on this presentation. But one of the things that I do is if you've got a landscape shot that doesn't have a traditional foreground element or any kind of streams, like that picture here has some leading lines that kind of go into the scene. If it lacks stuff like that, a lot of times I'll shoot a panoramic picture. I love the panoramic format. I've loved it for a long time. When I shot film back in the day, I used to have a Hasselblad X-Pan camera that shot nothing but panoramic images. So I've always loved that format. And it's just a good natural way, in my opinion, to see landscapes. And so I include these pictures because they're easy to take, they're easy to stitch together, and they just provide a view that the traditional 4x3 format that these cameras have just can't provide. And so that's why I shoot it. So that is stitched together. John gave me the information on that camera that he was talking about earlier. I'd have to look back at that, John. So I'll share my contact information with you at the end of this. And so if you would just shoot me an email, so I'd have your contact, I'll be sure to answer that question. But like I said, right now off the top of my head, I don't know a whole lot about those cameras. Just another landscape shot from Tuxedo Bay. This is actually taken with a 500 millimeter lens. It's not 500 millimeter lens, of course, isn't a traditional landscape lens, but it does a good job, especially if you're wanting to take a shot like this where you've got layers of landscape that it kind of compresses them and makes them look a little more stacked and exaggerates the lines a little more. And that's what I liked about it. I shot this picture at midnight that night when we were there. It was getting dark, but it wasn't completely dark yet. But that's what's cool about being in Alaska in July. What's not cool about being in Alaska in July is you get about 2 hours of sleep a night. But other than that, it's still kind of cool to be there. You can tell here another really low angle shot because I was skimming not across the very top of the grass, but across the grass. And again, to get a technique like this of these bears kind of loving on each other, and love was in the air that day because that boar would not leave that sow alone. He was with her the whole time. And I wasn't going to lay down in the swamp to get wet, but what I did do is crouch down like like I was playing hind catcher for a baseball team to get that shot. And then that's one of the same bears there when it was sitting alone. Just love the colors in this one. Love the background. I could have improved it by straightening the one. Now that I look at it, it could be improved by leveling the horizon on that thing in Lightroom, but still just a great pose and a great casual pose. And then after the Tuxedo Bay trip, I ended up going to Alaska the next month and did a trip, the tour of the Kenai Peninsula, Alaska trip, and that was great. Now it's not all about bears, but one element we do one day is all about bears because we end up going to Lake Clark, and on this particular day we went to Lake Clark and got in a john boat or flat bottom boat and then tooled around the lake called Crescent Lake while we were there. And I'd never shot pictures of bears from a boat before, but I got to tell you, it was pretty neat. I mean, for one reason, you didn't have to worry about crouching down because when you're sitting in a boat and the bears are on shore, they're at eye level already. And this is the kind of casual looks we saw of those brown bears while we were there. They were just there to feed. They've seen enough people. People don't cause them concerns. And this was one of the cubs that had been hanging out with mom all day and doing a little bit of swimming, looking for food. That was just a shot of him hanging out on the gravel beach. And again, shot it from the boat. One thing I need you to consider though when I'm showing you all these pictures is I'm usually the last ones to take pictures, and I never get to see everybody's pictures that they take on these trips. I'll see some of them, but I never get to see every one of them. But I can't imagine if I'm sort of the last one to pick up my camera and shoot pictures, and we've got a lot of capable photographers on these trips. They're not all just absolute beginners that are just picking up cameras. We have a lot of guests with a lot of people have a lot of skills, and even though they don't do it professionally, they still can kind of shoot at a professional quality level. And then we've got a lot of people who are kind of in the middle that can shoot great pictures. Maybe they're still trying to improve their skills a little bit, but it's very rare that we have just absolute ranked beginners who go on these trips. And so I always wonder if I'm the last one to take pictures because I'm trying to get everyone else started and let everyone else get their shots and get their opportunities. And I'm able to find shots like this and like this. I can't imagine some of our guest shots and what they look like. Well, I can't imagine some because I see them on the tribe, but I never get to see the whole collection. So I'm just when I see these pictures, when I curated this slideshow, it just made me feel good to know that we got people in these positions to let them have the opportunity to take pictures like this. And so that always gets me excited to think about things like that. This is even though I made a little bit of a critical error on this because I was too close to the bear. I mean, this is not cropped and it cut its feet off a little bit. And I cut its feet off a little bit. I still love this picture right here. That it's just the background is great. It's at a low angle, so it's kind of a power pose, and this is one of my favorite pictures from Lake Clark. And that bear I showed you earlier, this is the three cubs that were fishing with mom. Mother was unusual, and I'll show you a picture of her in a minute. She was unusual in the sense that when she would forage for fish, she would actually dive underwater. So she would jump in the lake, and then she would go underwater for a minute or two, or not a minute or two, 30 seconds to a minute, and then come up and have a fish in her mouth. And then she'd take it over on the bank, eat a little bit of it, and let her cubs have the rest. But these are the three cubs just sitting on the beach waiting for mom. This picture, too, I like. If I could change it, I wish you could see all three cubs' faces, but I think seeing that one cub's face and he's looking for mom tells a little bit of a story in itself. But the things that you don't think about, things that you may not think about that I really like about this picture is it's got the background here is superb. Couldn't have asked for a better background. That's one of the same three cubs there. Sandy just asked the question if it was being recorded that she came in late. Yes, it is being recorded, Sandy. So if you miss anything, you'll be able to go back and watch it, or the parts you missed, you can go back and watch it. This is a hard shot to take in the sense that when I took it, it happened so quick. The bear was actually trying to get a smell of us and see what we were, what we were trying to do as we were floating past it. And I shot it with a 500 millimeter lens. But when I looked at this picture earlier, the first thing I thought was, well, the nose is out of focus, but the eyes are in perfect focus. So I was actually focusing on the eyes when I shot this picture. And this is one of the trade-offs. If it happened so quick, I didn't have time to, I was just shooting pictures and not really I always have my camera, and this is a good lesson too. I always have my camera at kind of the baseline setting. So if I change anything, immediately when I'm done, I go back and I change it back to my baseline setting. So which is typically with this lens, I'm shooting it wide open. If it was 500 millimeters, I'm shooting it at f4, and ISO is between 4 and 800, depending on what I pick based on the light that day. So in this particular picture, I'd set it back to f4, and when this bear sniffed like this, it happened with in 2 seconds. So I really didn't have time to change the aperture, and I could have changed the aperture and got the whole thing in focus. But I can live with this one. I think it's okay. But again, I just love the body language and love the look on that bear's face, and then that's why I think it ultimately was okay, because then I got a really nice profile shot of that bear at a little bit below eye level. And again, I can't say enough, just every chance you get, try to strive getting pictures of these animals at eye level, because it's such a more flattering angle than it is being above them and looking down. And that soft light that day was fantastic. This picture is actually on the tribe page. This guy here, it's kind of neat. Like kids, you can tell different personalities of the bears just by watching them play a little bit. And this guy, he was a little bit of the outlaw of the trio of bears. He was the most aggressive, trying to get food from mom, and he was always most curious about us. And so when we would move away, he would follow us down the beach a little bit and just watch us. He wasn't aggressive in any way, just wanted to see what we were doing. But this is one of the times when if given a choice, I wish the sun wouldn't have came out. It came from behind the clouds in that instance, because it made the tree in the back a little bit hot. But the more I look at it, the more I realize I really do kind of like it, because the rim light on this bear and the backlighting on this bear is just stunning. And you can see from the direction of the shadow that sun was just right back over that bear's shoulder. But again, love the pose, love the look, love everything about this picture. This may be one of my favorite bear pictures I've took this whole past year. I just love everything about that shot. And again, I remember to take it in vertical, because that's sort of the orientation of the bear. And so I shot it vertically like that. That's how it came natively out of the camera on the orientation. And there's mom right there. That was her coming up after she had submerged herself looking for a fish, and came up and was trying to figure out, came up 50-handed that time. But, again, we're in a boat, so we're right at eye level with her. We're floating in the water with her. So her eyes are about as high as the edge of the boat was on that when we were in it. And we were floating down out through this lake in this boat. I'd asked, and this is another one of my favorite pictures, because one of the things I always try to do is take off the telephoto lens and shoot with something different. And so on this one particular shot, I made sure the guests had got the shot they wanted. And I told the guide that I want to get my 16 millimeter lens and lay on the front of the boat and see if I can shoot if the barrel posed nice enough for me to get a shot of a bear at 16 millimeters, because I wanted to get a lot of the landscape. And sure enough, they did. If you notice to the left of that bear, there's another one in the weeds behind it. I wish it wasn't there, but it was there. But it's hidden enough where it doesn't just draw your eye to that first, I think. But this is a brown bear at 16 millimeters. I shot that lens as wide open as it would get, and I wanted to get as much landscape as we could. So I was pretty happy with that shot too. And that's mom and two of the cubs coming down the beach. They were always there. On that lake trip, we just went back and forth in the same probably half-mile area looking for bears, because that was the densest concentration of bears. And we weren't moving quick. It's not like we were speedboating to one end and another. We just kind of slowly go upstream and then drift back downstream because this lake, it had an outlet, so it did have a little bit of current in it. And so we just kind of made that same stretch all day long. And we saw the same bears over and over. We probably saw a dozen different bears we saw the same bears over and over again, but it was still pretty nice. And then in the sense of taking pictures of everything bear related, this is just a shot of a fish I took. That it's important for me, again, to just capture all the sights and sounds and what motivates those bears. And of course, these fish were one of them. And I shot this picture with a GoPro, and those GoPros are really good tools to use in this case. Just stick them underwater, and you can shoot them on burst mode, or you can even shoot them in video mode and take a still frame out. And that's just one of the shots I got. And then it brings us into September in Katmai. I look at the time; it's 12:47. So this is going to go over a little bit, but it's if you'll stick with me, I'll keep talking about it because it's raining outside and I'm in no hurry to go anywhere. But this is Brooks Falls in Katmai. You know, a lot of times in September, you end up waiting on a bear to try to get that classical shot of a fish in its mouth. I've done that before. I didn't accomplish it this time we were in Katmai, but still fun watching the bears nonetheless. You're just trying to see what kind of nice poses you can get from these guys. Now, this is a shot, again, this is from the platform, so I'm above the bear looking down. Given a choice, I'd rather be at eye level with it, but you know, you can still, if you've got to shoot down, you can. We just don't have a choice there. But every now and then we'll get lucky, and there's more shots in this series. When we were on the platform, I mean, one day we always go wading on the river when we're in Katmai, and this was one of the days we did that. We were walking down to the river and heard some bears causing a commotion in the river, and because you got to keep your distance from them, this is one of the shots we shot from the bank as we were watching them kind of wrestle their way on the way past. This is another one from the platform because it's at a slightly elevated angle. I always thought this shot was kind of cool. When I shot this, I didn't realize, I just thought I was shooting a picture of a lot of nice reflections in the water, but then I realized that bear's looking at a duck that's swimming past. If you can see the duck in that lower right hand corner, I didn't even see the duck in the picture when I took the picture. This is at the top of Brooks Falls, and when you're at the platform in Brooks Falls, for the most part, this is as close as you can get to an eye level shot with the animal. But again, it's not an extreme angle. It's not a terrible angle. It's just not my favorite angle. This was of a cub that was hanging out with the mom, his sibling and mom, and she was teaching them how to fish, and they happened to get up on the bank near us when we were there. And these are the same guys fighting. Now, I say for the most part, you can't get an eye level with bears on the platform, but there was one instance this year we could, because there's a bear that, if you've never been to Katmai before, if I can explain it, you've got Brooks Falls that are down at the river, and then there's a hill that runs up and away from the river. And so that platform is situated, the viewing platform is situated right on top of the bluff before the river starts. And so behind the platform, that hill continues up and away from you. So I've always wanted to get lucky and have a bear come down that hill behind us, because we'd be in the protection of the platform. But at the same time, we could have a bear at eye level, and it never happened to me before until this year. We had 3 bears come up from behind us this year, and we're able to get really nice, tight eye level pictures of those bears. And again, what I love about this one is just that rim light that's around the animal and how beautiful that looks. And that was you can see a little bit of water droplets in the air there. That was right after the bear shook off. And just love that angle and love the pose. He hung out there for probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes and left. I know I've seen some of the pictures of the people that were with us on that trip. I thought I saw Brad in here earlier. He had some nice pictures of it. And, you know, it's just one of those things that when it happens, and we get lucky. And that's what happened there. The bears just came up in a beautiful spot, and we were able to take advantage of it because, you know, we were there. I mean, sometimes you get lucky when you're in the field, but you'll never get lucky unless you're out there. And that's one of the things we always try to do on these trips is just get you out there and in the best light and in good situations. And then that way, if the unexpected action does happen, we're all ready for it, and we were certainly ready for it that day. And the shot here, just more bear wrestling pictures. Like I was saying at the first of this, I've seen literally thousands of bear, or more than 1,000 bears since that number 3 one I saw back in 2017 on the Catmai trip that I went on, and I never tire of seeing them. They're just beautiful animals. They're super animated. They're always doing something interesting, and the only thing I'm disappointed about is because of the situation with travel and COVID, that polar bears trip has been postponed a couple of times when I was supposed to do it, but it looks like we're all set to go for next year. So I'm really looking forward to adding some new bears to my list and getting to see those guys in the wild, because black bears are cool and they're big the first time you see a big adult, but then when you see a big brown bear, you think to yourself, or I think to myself, that black bear looks small in comparison. Well, I'm ready to see a polar bear, because polar bears are going to make brown bears look small in comparison. It's neat that we still have places in the world where we can go see stuff like this right here and go experience it firsthand and really experience that in a safe manner, relatively safe manner. I mean, it's not, you've always going to have a level of, not danger. Danger is the wrong word for it. You're always going to have some level of risk. I mean, the safest place to be is in your house where you never go out. Anytime you step outside, you always incur some level of risk. But even when you go into the wild like this around brown bears like in Katmai, the spruce grouse in Katmai have injured just as many people there as what the brown bears have, which means they've never been injurious to anybody there. So it's a safe place to go for people, because the bears just ignore you. But it's cool to go somewhere like that, where places like this exist, where you can just see bears being bears and your presence doesn't seem to disturb or deter them. And then just a picture of a bear that we saw walking through the woods in Katmai, and it was shaking off, and I didn't get it on the initial shake. I caught it right at the end because it just happened. It just happened so fast. Sandy asked, will you go back to Katmai in 2022? If you mean backcountry journeys, yes. Now, if I don't know, Sandy, if I'm on those trips, but I know backcountry journeys will be in Katmai in 2022. I'm vague on whether I'm going or not, because my schedule changes some every now and then. It doesn't change a lot, so I always know when I'm going when I go. And so, but I know that the backcountry journeys will be going there. So another guy will be going there. And then Jeff asked the question for the Katmai trip: is everything you're showing us at 500 millimeters, will the 100 to 500 come in handy, or are the best shots at the max zoom? It's really everything, Jeff. I'm showing you the 500 millimeter lens because that's just what I've got. I don't have the 1 to 5 zoom, but that 1 to 5 zoom would be handy. And this is also kind of my shooting style. I like really tight shots, really up close for the most part. But the 1 to 500 would be fine. If I had the 1 to 500, I would probably use that one just because it's such a versatile lens. I just don't have it, so I just use that straight 500. That's why they're all biased at 500 millimeters. It's not the best lens to use. It's just the best lens I have to use. And then we're wrapping this up. These were actually shot last week in the Great Smoky Mountains. This is another example where the bears showed up quick. There was a mom there we saw with 3 cubs, and we had to find a parking spot and get out quick and make sure everybody was set up. And then I didn't have time to set up my tripod because these bears were on the move, and so I used a fence post to rest my camera on to shoot these pictures. And Sandy asked, is a 1 to 400 okay too? Yeah, a 1 to 400 would be fine for Katmai, Sandy. So this is This is actually the mom of the 3 cubs. I didn't get a picture of. They were kind of strung out as they were walking, so I didn't get a picture of all 3 of them together. But I just sort of tried to concentrate on one bear at a time as I was doing this. But one of the things about this is you notice she's lactating still, and so she's you can see she's still nursing those cubs, which I thought was pretty fascinating because she's getting pretty big, or the cubs are getting pretty big because that's one of her cubs there too. They're probably 3/4 her size. And man, the Smokies right now, they're beautiful too. Goodness gracious, it's so pretty up there. I was actually up there on two trips. This is what I just got back from, and I mean this is probably a little sacrilegious to say this, but I love the mountains. I think the mountains are beautiful, but I am a child of the woods and always have been. It's uh, those mountains in the woods run that stuff runs in my veins because I grew up in the woods. And so anytime you can go to a place like the Smokies where you still got all that old growth forest and then the colors this time of year are just magnificent. And oh yeah, by the way, we throw bears on top of that to add the bonus. It's just that's a pretty special place to be this time of year. And then I think, nope, I got a couple more pictures to show. Just more of the same bears. This is an ideal situation here. I like just the background where it's relatively far away from the animal, and then the animal's against that background, and you can get a good out of focus shot like that. And a bonus thing too, the one thing that I've always joked about black bears that I didn't like about them is for every 10 black bears I see, 8 of them have their heads down because they're foraging somewhere. So to get shots of these bears on the move with their heads up, that was a bonus as well. All right. Well, look at that. It's 12:58. I finished on time. Are there any questions about any of this stuff? Like I said, I tried to sprinkle in a few lessons as we went along, but they'd asked me just to do a slideshow of some of the bears that I saw on trips this year, really to try to hopefully get you guys re-inspired that have been on some of these bears trips before, or the ones that haven't been, really get you fired up about going. Because I can tell you, of all the trips we do, the ones that get asked about the most are the bear trips. They're just phenomenal experiences just to get to see bears in the wild like that and get to experience them the way we get to experience them. Again, I never get tired of it. I never take it for granted. And it's always my honor to get to take people out to go experience those things, those bears, like, again, like we get to experience them. It's just something I never get tired of. And so I encourage you, if you're thinking about doing a bears trip, just send me a question or send the people at Backcountry Journeys a question, and we'll if you've got any questions about these trips, we'll be happy to answer them. I got a few other questions and comments coming in. Hey Alan, appreciate the comments. Look forward to seeing you again. Al was on this Katmai trip that we were on this past September, and so a lot of the scenes I was showing you, he was right there with us when we did it, and it was phenomenal to get to see that. And that was actually Alan's second trip with me, and it's always good to see him, and always good to get to share the experience with him. And then let's see, I saw another question come up. Where'd it go? Someone had mentioned in there, I don't know what happened to the question though, or the comment. Someone had mentioned there about they were using Sony's, and I was going to address that, but it's the question or the comment disappeared. I don't know where it went to. Bruce says, looking forward to Katmai in fall of 2022. Yeah, it's you're in for a treat. I'm telling you, it's such a great experience. So Sandy asked the question, which Katmai trip is less buggy, spring or fall? Well, we don't do a spring Katmai trip. We only go in July and then again in September. And so that's the best time to see bears in Katmai. And truthfully, I've been on both trips, and I've been multiple times on those trips. Truthfully, none of them are super buggy. That really the bugs are the least of the concerns. Not that you won't see any bugs, but for the most part, the bugs just aren't bad at all. And so I I don't even think that's something you worry about. Even when we were in Tuxedney Bay, uh, we saw a ton of bugs, but they just weren't. They just weren't. They didn't bother us a whole lot. Yeah, I got bitten by a few mosquitoes, but it wasn't where they were just constantly swarming you and were just a nightmare to be around. They were all manageable. And then, okay, well, I've got several questions coming in. Someone jump back and forth. Marsha says she has Sony gear and really like the latest cameras and lenses. Yeah, I've been looking at Sony stuff. So I'm either going to stick with Canon or I'm going to go with Sony. I've just got to decide what I want to do, and I'm going to try to decide this week. Linda asked, what are some differences between Lake Clark and the Katmai trips? Well, the thing in common are going to be the bears. Both are excellent opportunities for bears. Lake Clark usually happens in July when the bears are feeding on clams and feeding on sedges and stuff. The Katmai trip, the bears are feeding on fish, and so they all congregate to the river. So that's really the primary difference. And even on Katmai, if you go in July, the bears are skinnier. If you want to see the big fat bears, go in September, because that's when they've gorged themselves on fish all summer, and they're just they look like big bowling balls with legs at that point. They're just huge. But because they're so big, they're maybe not quite as active when they're fishing on the river. And so if you want to see active bears, it's July. But really the difference in the bottom line is difference in Lake Clark and Katmai is just what they're feeding on and the time of year you go and just the scenery overall. And then got another question on the Katmai trip. How much hiking per day? I'm going to tell you the number, but don't be intimidated by the number because it's a lot of start and stop hiking. We'll do 3 to 5 miles a day on the hiking, but it's not like we're walking 5 miles and then taking pictures and walking back. You may walk along the way and take pictures of bears along the way. So it's a lot of start and stop, and it's all flat, so it's not too bad at all. Noel asked, do you get to see other critters on these Alaska trips? Yeah, you do. On the Katmai trip, for example, we'll see wolves occasionally, but you see a lot of bird life everywhere from gulls to ducks to just the songbirds that live there, as well as grouse. Tuxedney Bay, we saw wolves and foxes on that trip. They weren't expected, but we saw them, and a lot of bird life there as well. So it's not just bears. You'll see some other ancillary wildlife species, but bears are really, really the focus there. So just to let you know that. And let me see. I got a lot of questions coming in everywhere. Al says, need to go on a polar bear shoot with you? Yes, you do, Al, because that's going to be a good one. And then Margaret says, can you send me a quick overview of how you bring out the brown bear's eyes? I have a hard time bringing out their eyes in the Lightroom. Really, on a lot of these pictures, I really didn't do anything to bring out the brown bear's eyes. It's just a matter of some of them like that I didn't. But most of the time, if you'll slide that shadow slider in Lightroom, if they're in a little bit of shadow, it'll make them pop to some degree. And so there's no exact science in how I do it. It's really situational, but a lot of times just the shadow slider will work to do that, Marcia. Or Margaret, I'm sorry. Marcia was telling me about the Sony gear, so I was kind of stuck on that a little bit. All right. Well, any other, I'm still here. If you've got any other questions, I'll stay as long as you need to. I wanted to put this last slide up. Not that I'm not going anywhere imminently. I want to make sure I get all the questions answered. But if you get finished with this presentation or if we finish this presentation and you have some other questions you'd like to ask, there's my email address. It's just russell@russellgraves.com. I can tell you, if you've got a question or a comment, don't be afraid to contact me. I tell people all the time that I am, sometimes it may take me a day or two to get to the emails, but I'll always answer my emails. So if you can be patient with me sometimes I'll answer your question or answer your comment, but sometimes it does take me a day or two to get back with that. So yeah, I'll wait around for a couple more minutes and I'll ramble on about whatever you want me to talk about. But if anybody has any questions about anything, feel feel free to let me know. I'm just looking back over the questions and make sure I didn't miss anything. I think we're good. So yeah, just appreciate everyone's time. I know I don't think I've got a webinar next week, but I do think I've got one in a couple weeks. But thanks for everyone's time, and again, look forward to seeing some of y'all in the field again when these trips come up. And again, if there's anything I can do to help in the meantime, just let me know. Send me an email or my phone number's on my website. Give me a call, and I always love talking photography. But anyway, take care, guys, and hope to talk to you soon. Thanks.